My name is Valerie Brooks. I was 50 years old when my husband of 27 years looked me in the eyes, or rather, avoided my eyes and told me we had outgrown each other. His name is Nathan Brooks. He worked in finance, a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm in Atlanta. We built a life together, raised a son, paid off debts, endured layoffs and surgeries and funerals. But none of that mattered when he decided I was no longer exciting enough. He said I had changed, that I was too quiet, too predictable. And just like that, he handed me divorce papers on a rainy Tuesday and told me he was moving out. What he didn't say was that he wasn't moving into a hotel or a temporary apartment. He was moving in with her Sierra Green, a woman he once introduced to me as a junior colleague from marketing. She was 34, the same age as our son, Dylan. 3 weeks after the divorce papers, he was sleeping in my bed, sipping wine in my kitchen, and posing for photos in front of the fireplace I had chosen tile by tile. They thought I'd walk away quietly, that I'd cry for a while and fade into the background. What they forgot was that the house was never just his. My name was still on the deed. And I wasn't going to disappear. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. But I started moving. Quietly, carefully. And it began with a single phone call. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the same one where I used to pack Nathan's lunch and help Dylan with his homework, when he told me the marriage was over. He couldn't even meet my gaze, just stared at his coffee like it held the answer to his guilt. I wasn't angry at first. I was stunned. I kept thinking, how does someone throw away nearly 3 decades like that? I had given up a major promotion at the bank when Dylan was born because Nathan's work hours were unpredictable. Someone had to be home. That someone was me. I managed the household. I kept our finances balanced, cooked every meal, folded laundry, and for 2 full years, I took care of Nathan's ailing mother in our guest room without a single complaint. I didn't want much, just mutual respect and loyalty. But apparently loyalty had an expiration date. Days passed, weeks, and then one morning I received a letter in the mail, not from Nathan. From her. It was printed on pale pink stationery, the kind you might use for a baby shower. It read, "Dear Valerie, please arrange a time to collect your remaining belongings. Nathan and I are settling in, and we prefer to begin this new chapter without disruptions. Mornings are best. Sincerely, Sierra Green." I sat there holding the letter, the teacup in my hand slowly going cold. My fingers trembled not from sadness but from something deeper. Rage? She called me a disruption. In the very house I helped buy, in the home I worked for, paid into, repaired, cleaned, and protected. She moved in like she owned the place. But I was about to remind them both that ownership comes with paperwork. And my name was still right there on the mortgage, untouched. They thought I was going to beg. They were wrong. I was about to teach them the cost of forgetting who helped build the life they were now living. The moment I read that letter, I knew I needed more than just emotional closure. I needed legal clarity. So I called Maya. She's been my best friend since college and a family attorney for over 20 years. She's the kind of woman who speaks softly but never wastes a word. When I explained everything, she didn't gasp or rant. She went quiet. Then she asked, "Is your name still on the deed?" I said, "Yes." Nathan never refinanced, said it was too much of a hassle. Maya paused. "Did he ever buy you out of your share of the property?" "No," I said. "Then legally," she said slowly, "you still own half the house." I blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means you can file a partition action, force a sale, or demand that he and Sierra buy you out at fair market value. Either way, they have no legal right to keep you out." I sat there in silence, looking out at the dogwood tree, blooming in my front yard. The petals were starting to fall, just like all the illusions I used to hold about Nathan. "Let's do it," I said. 2 days later, Nathan called me. His voice was sharp, coated in false concern. "Val, did you really hire a lawyer?" "Yes." "Why? Why make this harder than it has to be?" I kept my tone calm. "You already made it hard. I'm just following the path you laid out." He tried to guilt me, said I was bitter, that Sierra didn't feel comfortable with me hanging around in their new life. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, "Then maybe she shouldn't be living in a house that still has my name on the title." He hung up. Sierra emailed me again later that week. This time the tone wasn't fake sweet, it was condescending. She said I was humiliating myself, that I needed to let go, that Nathan deserved a fresh start, and I was clinging to a dead marriage. I didn't respond. Instead, I called Maya and said, let's turn up the heat. We filed the partition paperwork that same week. Everything was clean, airtight, and legally sound. This wasn't revenge, this was restoration. I wasn't making noise, I was making moves. And they never saw it coming. Nathan thought I was weak. Sierra thought I was irrelevant. But I was neither. I was a co-owner. I was patient. And I was done being quiet. The email Sierra sent told me to schedule a time, but she forgot one detail: Nathan never changed the locks. So I didn't schedule anything. I simply showed up. It was a sunny Friday morning when I pulled into the driveway. The same driveway where I once taught Dylan how to ride a bike. Now a white BM sat parked in my spot, hers of course. I sat there for a moment, gathering myself. I wasn't there to cause a scene. I wasn't there to shout or cry. I was there to collect the last of my things. With the same key Nathan gave me 20 years ago. The door clicked open like it always had. I stepped inside and paused. It looked familiar, but it wasn't home anymore. The couch was the same, but everything else had changed. The walls were painted a sterile beige, like a waiting room. The family photos I once hung were gone, replaced with framed quotes, things like "good vibes only and manifest happiness." It looked like a Pinterest board with no soul. I walked into the kitchen. She had rearranged everything. My spice rack was gone. The mason jar where I used to keep my tea bags now held gluten-free granola bars and organic lollipops. I felt a fire rising, not grief, not nostalgia, just heat. And then I heard her. Sierra came down the stairs in one of Nathan's old t-shirts. She froze when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I came to get my things," I said, holding up the printout of her own email. "You were supposed to schedule a time," she snapped. "We have rules, boundaries." I walked past her, slow and steady. "Well, sweetheart, as long as my name's still on this house, I'll come and go as I please." Her cheeks turned red. "Nathan will hear about this." "Good," I said. "He should have been the one to greet me." I packed in silence. A few books, a photo of Dylan as a baby, a necklace from my mother. I wasn't taking much. Not because I didn't have the right, but because I didn't need anything from that house. I had already decided I would never live there again. Not because I couldn't, but because I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Just a few days after my quiet visit, Maya called. "The court accepted the partition action," she said. "They'll be officially notified tomorrow." "Do I have to deliver it?" I asked. "No," she said with a smile in her voice. "Let the system slap them." And it did. Nathan called me 4 times the next day. I didn't pick up. His voicemail was frantic. "Valerie, what are you doing? This is insane. You're forcing us to sell the house." Yes, I was. After all he'd done, he still believed the house was his. He thought I would just walk away because that's what I had always done, kept the peace, stayed quiet. Not this time. He called again the day after. I finally answered. "Val, we need to talk." "So talk," I said calmly. "Why are you doing this?" "You mean why am I forcing a sale of a house I still legally own?" He went silent. "You know we can't afford to buy you out right now." "Then maybe," I said slowly. "You should have thought of that before you moved her in." His tone shifted, softer, like the Nathan I used to know. "You don't need this kind of stress," he said. "No," I agreed. "I don't. But you brought it on yourself." Then I hung up. 2 days later, Sierra called me, not texted, called. Her voice was shaky. "You're ruining us," she said between sniffs. "You're humiliating us." "Please, Valerie, be a woman about this." I paused for a moment. "Being a woman," I said, "means knowing your worth, and I'm done shrinking for either of you." Then I blocked her number. After that, I said nothing. I let Maya do the talking. Let the paperwork do the cutting. They tried to fight it, hired a lawyer, claimed it wasn't fair, that it was emotionally distressing. The judge didn't care. He looked at the deed, looked at the mortgage, and said the words I had waited months to hear. Miss Brooks remains a legal co-owner. Unless a private buyout is reached, the property must be sold. Maya glanced at me in court and smiled. I didn't smile back. Not yet. Because they still had keys. They still had hot showers and a functioning kitchen. But now they also had a deadline. 60 days. 60 days to either pay me or pack up and leave. And I already knew they couldn't do either. Sierra wasn't working. Nathan's income hadn't changed. Now they had legal fees on top of their mortgage. A week later, I drove past the house. A homemade for sale by owner sign was staked in the lawn. They were trying to handle it without an agent, trying to avoid commission fees and rush the sale. But the market wasn't kind that month. And karma doesn't care how desperate you are. I went home, sat at my new kitchen table, a smaller, humbler one but mine, and I lit a candle, not for them. For me. Because this wasn't about destruction. It was about restoration. And they were just beginning to understand what it felt like to be erased from something they once thought was theirs. By week 5, a serious offer came in, full asking price, no contingencies. The buyers were a young couple from North Carolina, expecting their first child. They loved the garden, the open layout, the quiet street. Maya called me first. They want to close in 2 weeks. I said, perfect. That same day, Nathan texted me. We need to talk about staging. I didn't respond. Then came a second message. Please don't remove everything. Sierra's feeling really exposed right now. I nearly laughed. She hadn't felt exposed when she wore my husband's shirt and called me pathetic in my own kitchen. But I took a breath, stayed silent, and forwarded it to Maya. She handled everything. I didn't step foot in that house again. That was by design. Let them feel the walls closing in. Let them walk through the bedroom, where I once cried myself to sleep, and wonder what else they had underestimated. I heard from Dylan that tensions were boiling. Nathan had started sleeping on the couch. Sierra was snapping at everything. She called the agent in tears, asking if they could delay showings. The agent reminded her, this was a court-ordered sale, not a favor. The house had to be spotless, available for strangers to tour and judge every inch. It was poetic. They had turned my life into something disposable. Now they were living on borrowed time. A week before closing, Nathan showed up at my new place, a quiet 2-bedroom unit with a garden. He knocked like he still had a right. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He looked smaller, not thinner, just collapsed, like his pride had lost its spine. I came to ask you something, he said. I crossed my arms. Go ahead. Can you help us with the deposit on our new place? We're short. I blinked. Excuse me? He raised both hands like he knew how ridiculous it sounded. We just didn't think you'd go this far. You thought I'd stay quiet, I said for him. He nodded slowly. You've never been the type to retaliate. I'm not retaliating, I said. I'm restoring. There's a difference. He looked down at the porch floor. Sierra's staying with her sister now. I'm in a hotel near River Park. I didn't end this, I reminded him. You did. You moved her into my home before the ink on our divorce even dried. He looked like he wanted to argue, but the words didn't come. You didn't just replace me, I said. You erased me, so I did the same. Then I closed the door. Gently. The house sold. I walked away with over $370,000 after fees and taxes. Not a fortune, but enough to start over without asking anyone's permission. I didn't splurge. I didn't book a vacation or buy a convertible. I sat down with Maya and a financial advisor, a sharp woman named Patrice with natural curls and pearl earrings, who said one thing that stuck with me. Let's make sure this money outlives the betrayal. That's exactly what I wanted. I invested half. With the rest, I bought a condo, modest, modern, and entirely in my name. No co-signers. No joint accounts. No toothbrush beside mine in the bathroom. Just me. Then I disappeared, not dramatically, not bitterly, quietly. I deactivated social media, stopped going to the same church, didn't answer the checking-in messages from people who once pitied me but now seemed nosy. I moved 2 states away to a small town near Santa Fe, New Mexico. Here I'm not Greg's ex-wife. I'm Miss Brooks, the woman who bakes banana bread for the neighbors, volunteers at the animal shelter, and hums old gospel songs on her porch. No one here knows what I've been through. And I like it that way. A month after the sale closed, I donated $50,000 anonymously to a local women's legal fund. No plaque, no announcement. Just a note, for the women who don't yet know they're allowed to fight back. Later, I read in the fund's newsletter that my donation helped 3 women leave abusive marriages. 2 of them filed lawsuits that changed the course of their lives. That's legacy.
Not just surviving, but building something better in the wreckage. Sometimes I sit in my little kitchen, sunlight pouring in through the window, and I write it all down. Not for them. For me. To remind myself that I walked through fire and came out clean. Greg didn't just lose a wife. He lost access to my loyalty. Sierra didn't just lose a house. She lost the illusion that you can build happiness on someone else's ashes and not get burned. They thought I was weak because I was quiet. They thought I wouldn't fight because I didn't shout. But they misunderstood me entirely. Silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's the beginning of war. Greg and Sierra thought I would vanish. Instead, I stood still and watched everything they built on top of me collapse under its own weight. Not because I screamed, but because I signed. They packed boxes and disappeared from a life they stole. And I didn't even raise my voice. That's not revenge. That's recovery. Now, I sip tea from a mug Maya gave me. It says unbothered and paid. And every time I lift it to my lips, I smile. Because I didn't just take back my house. I took back my voice. I took back my name. And I left behind the version of me who thought being quiet meant being powerless. To every woman who's been erased, underestimated, or told she should disappear, don't. Your silence can be your power. Use it. And when the time is right, sign the papers, walk away, and let your peace speak louder than any scream. Like, share and comment below if this story stayed with you. You're not alone, and it's never too late to begin again.
The room was filled with white roses, the sound of soft piano music, and the expectant silence of 100 guests waiting for the vows to be spoken. Claire stood at the altar in her shimmering gown, her hands trembling slightly in the glow of the chandeliers. The minister lifted his book, ready to pronounce the words every bride dreams of. But just as Claire opened her mouth to say "I do," her mother, Evelyn, rose from the front row and spoke in a clear, steady voice. "Stop." Gasps spread across the hall. All eyes turned toward Evelyn, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair and a face that carried both tenderness and steel. She was not the kind of mother who enjoyed drama, and she had never once in her life raised her voice in public. Yet at that moment she stood tall, clutching a thick envelope in her hand, ready to unravel a truth that would shatter the perfect image of this wedding. Claire stared at her in disbelief. Her daughter's eyes were wide, filled with fear and confusion. What was her mother doing? Why here, in front of everyone? The groom, Ryan, shifted nervously at the altar. His mother, Linda, stiffened like a statue, her lips pressed into a thin, furious line. It might have looked like Evelyn was ruining her daughter's happiness, but in reality she was saving her. Saving her from a man whose charming smile hid debts, lies and plans that could destroy her future. Evelyn knew that what she was about to reveal would change the course of her daughter's life forever. The question was not whether she should speak, but whether Claire would understand why her mother had chosen this exact moment to protect her. Months before that unforgettable wedding day, everything seemed like a dream. Claire would come home glowing, her voice light with excitement as she shared every detail of her upcoming marriage. She would show Evelyn the sketches of her wedding gown, the floral arrangements she had chosen, and even the playlist for the reception. To Claire, it all felt like a fairy tale coming true. Ryan, the groom-to-be, looked perfect on the surface. He was handsome, confident, and seemed deeply invested in Claire's happiness. He often brought expensive gifts, spoke of his business ventures with pride, and made promises of a bright future together. When he was around, he charmed everyone with his smile, including some of Evelyn's closest friends. People whispered that Claire was lucky to have found such a successful man. Then there was Linda, Ryan's mother. From the first meeting, she showered Claire with compliments. She praised her manners, her beauty, and even her choice of wedding colors. To anyone listening, Linda sounded like a supportive future mother-in-law. But Evelyn could not shake the feeling that there was something rehearsed in Linda's kindness, as though every word had been carefully chosen to create an illusion of warmth. Still, Evelyn kept quiet. She knew better than to judge too quickly. After all, weddings were stressful for everyone. Perhaps she was only being overly protective, so she smiled, nodded, and helped Claire with the endless preparations. She sat with her during dress fittings, offered advice on invitations, and listened as Claire spoke about how Ryan made her feel safe and loved. To the outside world, this was the picture of a perfect match, but beneath the sparkle and laughter, Evelyn's instincts whispered that something was not right. As the months passed, small cracks began to show through the flawless surface of Ryan's charm. Evelyn was not one to jump to conclusions, but she had lived long enough to know when something felt off. The first sign came during a dinner at a downtown restaurant. Claire had shared a funny story from work, and everyone laughed except Ryan. Instead, he rolled his eyes and muttered under his breath, "That is hardly professional." Though he quickly covered it with a smile and raised his glass in a toast, Evelyn caught the flash of irritation on his face. It was brief, but it stayed with her. Another time, Evelyn tried to ask Ryan about his business. She wanted to understand more about the man her daughter planned to spend her life with. Yet Ryan's answers were vague, filled with complicated jargon that never really explained anything. "It is just investments and partnerships," he would say, brushing her off as if the details were too complex to bother explaining. Evelyn noticed how quickly he changed the subject whenever finances came up. Linda, too, began to show a side that worried Evelyn. During one of the planning meetings, Claire suggested a menu she liked, something simple and meaningful to her. Linda immediately interrupted. "No, that won't impress the guests. You should trust me on this." Claire's opinion was swept aside without a second thought, and Ryan nodded in agreement with his mother. Evelyn watched her daughter's smile fade, though Claire said nothing in protest. Individually, these moments might have seemed harmless. Many brides deal with pushy in-laws or disagreements during wedding planning, but together they painted a troubling picture. Evelyn began to wonder if her daughter's voice and choices were slowly being silenced, and though she wanted to believe the best, her instincts told her this was only the beginning of something darker. The night that confirmed Evelyn's fears began like any other. She had stopped by Ryan's family estate to drop off a piece of fabric swatch for Claire's dressmaker. Claire was upstairs trying on gowns, and Evelyn quietly made her way through the large, echoing hallway. As she reached the sitting room, voices drifted through the half-open door. It was Ryan and his mother, Linda. At first, Evelyn hesitated. She did not want to intrude on a private conversation. But then she heard Ryan's voice, sharp and impatient. "Once she signs the agreement, everything will be under my control. Her inheritance, her accounts, all of it. Claire is too naive to question anything." Evelyn froze. Her chest tightened as Linda's laughter followed. "Exactly, darling. You just need to keep her sweet until the wedding is done. After that, she will be in no position to resist. And Evelyn, do not worry about her. She is sentimental, not smart enough to see what is happening." Those words hit Evelyn like a slap. Her hands shook as she pressed herself against the wall, praying they would not see her standing there. Every instinct screamed at her to burst in and defend her daughter, but she forced herself to stay silent, to listen, to gather the truth she needed. The conversation went on, Ryan detailing his debts, his failed ventures, and his plan to use Claire as his financial lifeline. Linda encouraged him every step of the way, her tone dripping with satisfaction. To them, Claire was not a bride or a partner, she was simply a means to survive. Evelyn's heart pounded as she slipped out quietly. She could hardly breathe, the weight of what she had heard pressing down on her. That night, as she lay awake, one thought repeated in her mind: "If I tell Claire now, she will be devastated. I need proof, solid proof, before I destroy her world." Evelyn knew she could not rely only on what she had overheard. Ryan and Linda would deny everything, and Claire might even believe them. To protect her daughter, Evelyn needed proof that could not be twisted or explained away. That was when she remembered an old friend, Marcus, a retired private investigator who had once worked closely with her late husband. If anyone could uncover the truth, it was him. Over coffee in a quiet diner, Evelyn explained the situation. Marcus listened without interrupting, his sharp eyes narrowing as she spoke. When she finished, he simply nodded. "Leave it with me. If Ryan is hiding something, I will find it." The following weeks were some of the longest of Evelyn's life. She carried on with wedding preparations, smiling through dress fittings and cake tastings, all while keeping the secret that gnawed at her heart. Claire noticed her mother's quietness, but Evelyn brushed it off, saying she was only tired. Inside, however, she was praying that Marcus would uncover the truth quickly. And he did. A thick file landed in Evelyn's hands one Tuesday morning. Inside were bank statements showing staggering debts, lawsuits filed by former business partners, and even newspaper clippings from another state where Ryan had been accused of fraud but settled before trial. Worst of all, there were contracts showing Linda's involvement in arranging marriages of convenience for financial gain. This was not the first time they had used someone for money. Evelyn's stomach turned as she read each page. It was worse than she imagined. Claire was not just marrying into a strained family dynamic, she was walking straight into a trap. Evelyn knew then that silence was no longer an option. She would have to act, no matter how much it hurt. That evening, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table with the file spread out before her. Every page was another nail in the coffin of Ryan's carefully crafted image. She traced the edge of a photograph with her finger, her mind torn in two directions. Should she tell Claire immediately and risk shattering her heart? Or should she wait, choose the perfect moment, and make sure there was no room for denial? The memories of her own youth came rushing back. Evelyn remembered being 23, standing in front of a man she thought she could trust, her late husband, only to learn years later that he had been unfaithful. She had kept silent then, burying her pain for the sake of appearances. That silence had cost her years of peace. And now, watching Claire step blindly toward the same kind of betrayal, Evelyn felt her chest ache with both fear and determination. One moment she pictured storming into Claire's room, throwing the documents down and begging her to walk away. The next moment, she imagined Claire looking at her with disbelief, accusing her of jealousy or of trying to ruin her happiness. That possibility terrified Evelyn more than anything. Losing her daughter's trust would be unbearable. She poured herself a cup of tea, her hands trembling as she lifted the mug. At last she whispered aloud to the empty room, "I will not stay silent again. Not this time. I will protect her, even if she hates me for it." The words steadied her. They reminded her of what it meant to be a mother, not just to love, but to protect, even when it meant being misunderstood. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, sunlight spilling across the manicured lawns of the estate where the ceremony would take place. Guests began to arrive in their finest clothes, laughter and chatter filling the air as photographers captured every moment. To anyone looking in, it was the perfect scene, a celebration of love and promise. Claire was radiant in her lace gown, her smile wide though her hands shook as she held her bouquet. She moved gracefully through the rooms, greeting relatives, pausing for pictures, her excitement bubbling over. Everyone admired her beauty, but only Evelyn noticed the flicker of nervousness in her daughter's eyes. Evelyn wished she could pull Claire aside, tell her everything, but she knew the time had not yet come. The weight of the envelope in her handbag reminded her of what still needed to be done. Ryan played his part well. He greeted guests with charm, shook hands with confidence, and even knelt down to compliment the flower girls. His polished image drew praise from every corner. Beside him, Linda glided through the crowd, offering air kisses and rehearsed compliments, radiating pride like the matriarch of a perfect family. But Evelyn, watching from the sidelines, saw the rehearsed nature of it all. She saw the way Ryan's smile faded the moment people turned their backs, and the way Linda's eyes darted with calculation. As the music began and guests took their seats, Evelyn walked slowly to the front row. She sat down, her hands folded tightly over her lap, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside her purse, the documents Marcus had gathered lay waiting. She knew that in just a few moments everything would change. The ceremony was beginning, and so was her moment of truth. The minister opened his book and began to speak, his voice echoing gently through the hall. Guests leaned forward, ready to witness the vows. Claire's face glowed as she looked at Ryan, her lips trembling with anticipation. Evelyn's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She clutched her purse tightly, her breath shallow. The moment had come. "Do you, Claire, take this man?" "Stop." Evelyn's voice cut through the room, steady and unshakable. Every head turned toward her. The guests gasped, whispers rising in waves. Claire froze, her bouquet slipping slightly in her hand. Evelyn stood, her silver hair catching the light, her presence commanding attention. She stepped into the aisle and pulled the thick envelope from her bag. Her eyes never left Ryan's. "Before my daughter speaks another word, there is something everyone here deserves to know." Ryan's smile faltered. "Evelyn, this is highly inappropriate." She held up the papers. Is it inappropriate to reveal the truth? These are court documents, debt records, and evidence of fraud tied directly to you. And recordings, she continued, her voice unwavering, of you and your mother planning to use Claire for her inheritance. The room fell silent. Claire's eyes widened in horror as Evelyn pressed a small recorder, filling the hall with Ryan's own voice. Once she signs, everything will be under my control. Gasps erupted. Murmurs spread like fire. Guests turned to Ryan, their admiration turning into suspicion. Ryan stammered, his face red. This is taken out of context. But Linda snapped, unable to contain herself. You should have been more careful, Ryan. Her voice rang out, sharp and furious. The crowd erupted. Claire dropped her bouquet, tears streaking her face as she looked from Ryan to her mother. In that moment she understood everything. Evelyn had not come to ruin her wedding. She had come to save her. The ceremony collapsed into chaos. Guests stood from their chairs, voices rising in shock and disbelief. Some clutched their pearls, others whispered furiously, while a few shook their heads in pity for Claire. The dream wedding unraveled before everyone's eyes, but Evelyn stood firm, her gaze locked on her daughter. Claire turned to Ryan, her voice trembling. Is this true? Ryan's lips parted, but no words came. His silence was the only answer she needed. She pulled the ring from her finger and let it fall to the floor with a soft clink that echoed louder than any shout. Gasps filled the room once more as she stepped back from him, her body shaking with both rage and heartbreak. Linda rushed forward, trying to salvage the moment, but several guests had already surrounded Evelyn, asking to see the documents. The evidence was undeniable. Within days, the papers Evelyn revealed were handed to lawyers. Ryan faced multiple lawsuits from his former business partners, and creditors swarmed in to claim what he owed. Linda, once admired for her poise and elegance, became the subject of scandal, her reputation in the community shattered beyond repair. As for Claire, she struggled in the days that followed. Her heart was broken, her trust bruised, but she was free. Free from the trap that had been carefully laid for her. Each night, Evelyn stayed by her side, reminding her gently that strength often comes from surviving the storm. Together they picked up the pieces of her life step by step. The wedding was gone, but Evelyn knew she had given her daughter something far more valuable than a beautiful ceremony. She had given her the chance to reclaim her future. Weeks later, the shock of the cancelled wedding had begun to fade. Claire no longer wore the heavy look of betrayal on her face. Instead, there was a quiet strength in her eyes, the kind that only comes from surviving something painful and walking away wiser. She and Evelyn often took long walks together in the evenings, the cool air wrapping around them as they spoke openly about the past and the future. One evening, as they sat on a park bench watching the sunset, Claire turned to her mother. You saved me. I didn't see it, but you did. Thank you for not letting me make the biggest mistake of my life. Evelyn simply squeezed her daughter's hand, her eyes glistening. That's what mothers do. We carry the burden when our children cannot see it. We protect, even if it means being misunderstood. The story of that day became more than a cancelled wedding. For Evelyn, it was proof that silence is not always golden. Sometimes the greatest act of love is finding the courage to speak when no one else will. And for Claire, it was a reminder that true love is never built on lies, manipulation, or financial gain. It is built on trust, respect, and honesty. To everyone listening now, remember this: appearances can be deceiving, but a mother's intuition is rarely wrong. If you have someone in your life who fights for you, even when it hurts, hold on to them. And if this story resonates with you, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and leave a comment about your own experiences. Your voice matters, and your story might just save someone else. The first time my son slammed the door behind me and left my suitcase on the porch, I realized my life was about to change forever. My name is Evelyn Parker, and at 72, I carry the kind of stories no one believes until they see the ending. That morning I was wearing my good Sunday dress, the one I saved for church and special occasions. I never imagined it would also be the outfit I wore as my own child locked me out of his house like I was nothing more than a burden. David, my only son, stood beside his wife Melissa. They were in their 30s then, still sharp and ambitious, still convinced the world owed them comfort. Melissa crossed her arms, her expression as cold as the October air. She told me I was confusing the children, that I was too set in my ways, that their house was not big enough for 3 generations. David never defended me. He lowered his eyes and mumbled words about stress and responsibility, but he still carried my bags outside. 20 minutes later, my entire life was packed into 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. 60 years of memories reduced to whatever I could lift with my own hands. As the taxi pulled away and the first drops of rain touched the window, I promised myself I would not look back. Not because I was strong, but because I was too broken to face what I had lost. At that moment, I had no idea that humiliation would become the seed of the greatest transformation of my life. I did not know I would rise from those motel nights with only $800 to my name and turn it into a business worth millions. All I knew then was that family had cast me aside. What they called garbage, life would later prove to be gold. The Sunset Motel on the edge of Route 7 became my shelter, though calling it home would have been generous. The neon sign buzzed all night. The carpet carried stains older than I was, and the air conditioner rattled like it was struggling to breathe. $45 a night bought me 4 walls, a flickering lamp, and a bed that sagged in the middle. Still, after being thrown out by my own son, even that felt like a luxury. A door that locked was a small but powerful comfort when you had nowhere else to turn. The manager, Mr. Howard, was a man in his late 60s with thinning white hair and eyes that carried more kindness than he ever admitted out loud. After my first week, he slid an extra towel across the counter. "You're not like our usual guests," he said softly. "Most people checked in with secrets or debts chasing them. I had nothing chasing me except silence from the people I loved most. That silence hurt worse than any bill collector ever could." Mornings were the hardest. I woke each day forgetting where I was, until the smell of bleach and the sound of distant traffic reminded me. There were no children's voices, no laughter, no one asking if I wanted coffee. Just me and the cracked ceiling above my head. Some mornings I cried quietly into the thin motel pillow, embarrassed at how small I had become. Other mornings I forced myself to dress neatly, to remind myself that dignity was the one thing I still owned. I stretched every dollar like it was my last. A box of instant oatmeal and a jar of peanut butter kept me fed. I sold a few pieces of jewelry, not for much but enough to buy bus fare to the library. That library became my refuge. Free air conditioning, free internet, and the illusion of belonging among other people who were searching for something. I scanned job listings endlessly, though every rejection reminded me that 60 was not an age employers celebrated. Still, I refused to let bitterness take root. I told myself that if I had survived raising David alone after his father left, I could survive this too. I did not know it yet, but the cracks in that motel room were where the light would eventually enter. Broken places have a way of teaching you strength you never wanted to learn. By the 3rd week at the motel, I knew I had to find work or risk losing even the little roof I had. Every morning I dressed in the one blazer I had left, polished my shoes until the leather looked almost respectable, and walked from one business to the next with my resume folded neatly in a manila envelope. Some managers didn't even glance at me before shaking their heads. Others looked at my age and offered polite excuses about different directions or more current experience. Each rejection added weight to the loneliness already pressing on my chest. Still, I kept walking. And then one afternoon I found myself in front of a small garden center with a sign that read Thompson's Greenhouse. The smell of damp soil and fresh herbs spilled out as I stepped through the door. Behind the counter was a woman about my age, her hands covered in earth, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "Looking for something?" she asked. Her name was Linda Thompson, the owner. I told her I was searching for work, any work, even if it was sweeping floors. She studied me for a moment before asking about my background. I told her about managing the finances for my late husband's small contracting business, about keeping the books balanced when money was always tight. Numbers were my language, and organization was my strength. Linda tilted her head, almost skeptical, then led me to her cluttered office. Within 10 minutes I could see 3 ways she was losing money: overpaying suppliers, tracking inventory on paper scraps, and using outdated prices. I mentioned it gently, not wanting to sound critical. Her eyes widened just a little. "You have experience in bookkeeping?" she asked. 20 years, I said, though in truth it felt like a lifetime. She warned me the pay wasn't much, $15 an hour part-time. I nearly cried with relief. That first paycheck came to $240, and I treated it like winning the lottery. I bought a second-hand coffee maker, hung up the few family photos I still carried, and for the first time in weeks I felt like a person again. It wasn't a fortune, but it was dignity. And sometimes dignity is the seed from which hope grows. It was during those early months at Thompson's Greenhouse that I stumbled upon the spark that would change everything. One chilly November afternoon, I followed Linda out back as she supervised workers loading a truck with wilted plants. Dozens of pots filled with drooping leaves and brittle stems were being stacked like trash. End of season clearance, she explained with a sigh. These are unsellable. We toss them every year. To her, they were waste. To me, they looked like a second chance waiting to happen. I asked if I could take a few home. She laughed, certain I would only clutter my tiny apartment. They're dead, she told me flatly. But I didn't see death. I saw dormancy, neglect, and possibility. Linda finally shrugged. Take as many as you like, but don't say I didn't warn you. That evening I carried armfuls of pots up the narrow stairs to my studio above the pizza shop. Soon every surface window ledges, countertops, even the floor near my bed was filled with struggling plants. Neighbors whispered that I was odd, maybe even running some kind of strange business. Mrs. Chen from downstairs muttered, too many plants, every time she caught me with another pot. I ignored them. Night after night I researched plant care at the library, scribbling notes from gardening manuals and watching free online tutorials. I trimmed brown leaves, adjusted soil, watered carefully, and whispered encouragement as though the plants could hear me. In January, when snow blanketed the streets outside, I noticed tiny green shoots pushing through soil in pots that had looked hopeless. By February, buds appeared. By March, the apartment glowed with life. Out of nearly 200 plants, more than 3/4 were thriving. The air itself seemed fresher, filled with the scent of new growth. I returned to Thompson's greenhouse carrying the first batch. Linda's eyes widened. These look better than when I bought them, she gasped. I grinned, hiding the swell of pride. She bought every one back at half the original price, handing me $847 in cash. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just saving plants, I was saving myself. What others saw as worthless, I could see as potential. What others discarded, I could nurture into value again. Those plants were more than merchandise, they were proof that being thrown away does not mean the end. Sometimes it is only the beginning. From that single experiment, my life began to take on a rhythm I had not felt in years. Word spread quickly through town that the older woman above the pizza shop could bring nearly any plant back to life. Customers who had once passed me by now stopped to ask questions. Other garden centers heard rumors and called Linda to ask if I might take their unsold plants too. What started as a side project in my tiny studio was becoming something larger, something that carried both purpose and profit. By the second year, my evenings were no longer quiet. Pots lined the balcony, bags of soil stacked in the hallway, and the scent of lavender and basil drifted down to the pizzeria below. Joseph, the owner, joked that my jungle attracted more business than his pepperoni special. You make this place smell alive, he told me, smiling as he carried extra boxes upstairs so I could use them for plant trays. Even the neighbors who once whispered about my obsession began asking if they could buy a plant or two. Every spring I returned dozens of revived plants to Linda, each batch stronger and more vibrant than before. She paid me fairly, but more importantly, she respected me. She began to rely on me, and that recognition filled a wound my own family had left gaping. I was not invisible. I was not a burden. I was someone who created value where others saw none. As demand grew, I faced a new problem: space. My studio overflowed, and Joseph's parking lot slowly transformed into an impromptu greenhouse. Customers wandering in for pizza often left with a fern or hydrangea balanced under their arm. By year 3, I had saved nearly $15,000 more money than I thought I could manage after losing everything. With Linda's encouragement, I registered a small business license under the name Second Bloom Plant Recovery. The name felt right. It spoke not only of the plants but of myself, a woman beginning a second bloom in the late season of life. I worked endlessly, my hands cracked from soil and fertilizer, but every ache was matched by joy. When I signed my first independent contract with a garden center 2 towns away, I cried quietly on the bus ride home. It wasn't just business, it was proof that I was building a future entirely my own. I was no longer surviving on scraps of dignity. I was creating something lasting, something no one could take from me again. The woman who had once been discarded with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box was transforming. Each green shoot, each flower that returned from the edge of death, mirrored the life blooming inside me. I was not only recovering plants, I was recovering myself. By the 4th year, Second Bloom Plant Recovery was no longer a side project hidden above a pizza shop. It had become a steady business with real momentum. I rented a small warehouse on the edge of town, hired 2 part-time helpers, and built partnerships with more than a dozen garden centers across the county. What amazed me most was not just the revenue, though making more in a single season than I once earned in an entire year felt extraordinary. It was the respect. People who once dismissed me as too old or past my prime were now calling me for advice. The local newspaper ran a feature about my unusual business model, highlighting how I turned waste into profit. Soon after, I was invited to speak at a sustainability fair, standing on a stage in front of college students and business owners who scribbled notes as if every word I spoke mattered. I remember clutching the microphone, my voice shaking at first, until I saw the nods of encouragement in the crowd. When I stepped off that stage, I realized something important. My story wasn't just about plants. It was about proving that nothing and no one is ever truly beyond saving. Financially, I crossed milestones I had never dared to imagine. My annual income climbed into 6 figures, then doubled again. For the first time since my husband died, I felt not only secure but powerful. I moved from my cramped apartment into a bright townhouse with a small backyard that I filled with experimental plants. It wasn't just a home, it was a sanctuary built from resilience. Then came the day I visited Willow Heights, the wealthiest neighborhood in our town. The streets were lined with towering oaks, and the houses looked like something from a magazine. I remembered how David and Melissa used to drive through those streets on Sunday afternoons, pointing at mansions and saying, "One day." They never knew that one day would belong to me. When the real estate agent unlocked the doors of a grand white colonial with 12-foot ceilings and wide porches, I knew I had found my next chapter. It cost millions, but Second Bloom had grown enough to make it possible. I signed the papers without hesitation. Standing on the balcony of that home, I looked down at the town that once watched me leave in shame. The woman who had been pushed aside now owned the most prestigious address in the very neighborhood my son had only dreamed of. Success wasn't just measured in money or property. For me, it was the quiet knowledge that I had taken every insult, every rejection, every painful night in that motel, and turned it into fuel. I was not surviving anymore. I was thriving, and everyone could see it. News travels quickly in a small town. Within a week of signing the deed to my new home in Willow Heights, the local paper ran a short article, "Local businesswoman purchases historic estate." My name was printed in bold letters. I knew it was only a matter of time before the knock came at my door. That Saturday morning, I was still unpacking dishes when the doorbell echoed through the wide foyer. I glanced at the security monitor and froze. There they were, David, Melissa, and 2 teenagers I barely recognized as my grandchildren. Sophie, 16 now, stood with a nervous smile. Ethan, 14, shuffled his feet the same way his father used to when he was a boy. For 6 years, I had missed birthdays, graduations, and holidays. Now they stood at my doorstep, dressed neatly as if this were a planned performance. I opened the door but did not invite them in. "Well," I said, steadying my voice, "what an unexpected surprise." David cleared his throat. He looked older, his hair grayer, his shoulders not quite as straight. Melissa, however, wore her same polished expression, the one that had dismissed me years earlier. "Mom," David began, "we came to congratulate you on the house. It's beautiful." His eyes drifted past me into the marble entryway, unable to hide the hunger behind his words. Melissa smiled too brightly. "We've been thinking a lot about the past," she said. "We regret how things ended. We want to reconnect as a family." Her tone was sweet, but her eyes flickered with calculation. I had seen that look before, the look of someone who wanted something. I didn't need to guess what it was. Rumors of their financial troubles had already reached me through old friends. David had lost his job, the mortgage was behind, and Melissa's spending habits had only dug the hole deeper. I leaned against the door frame, studying the 4 of them. Sophie and Ethan avoided eye contact, shifting uncomfortably, as though they could feel the tension their parents were trying to mask. 6 years of silence, and suddenly they remembered the meaning of family just when I was standing in the house they had once only dreamed of. Their timing was perfect, and perfectly predictable. I finally stepped aside and motioned them into the living room. The sunlight streamed across the tall windows, catching the gleam of polished wood and the soft velvet of the chairs I had carefully chosen. I watched as David sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, Melissa's eyes darting across the room, already measuring its worth. Sophie and Ethan lingered near the doorway, hesitant, unsure if they truly belonged. So I began, settling into my armchair. "What is it you really came here for?" My voice was calm but firm. David fidgeted with his hands. Melissa spoke first. "We've had some hard times. David lost his job, the bills have piled up. We thought maybe we could stay here for a while, just until things turn around." There it was. No pretense left, only need dressed up as reconciliation. I let the words hang in the air before I turned to Sophie and Ethan. Do you know why we haven't seen each other in 6 years? Their eyes widened. Ethan shook his head. Sophie whispered, Dad said you moved away and didn't want to be part of our lives anymore. The lie sliced deeper than any insult. That isn't true, I said gently. I was told to leave. I had nowhere to go. I wanted nothing more than to stay close to you, but I was not given the choice. Their faces shifted from confusion to hurt. Is that true? Sophie asked her father. David's silence was louder than any confession. I reached for a small box on the side table and pulled out an old letter, his letter, the one he wrote in guilt years ago. Your father once admitted he regretted what happened. He begged me not to tell your mother because she had threatened to leave if I returned. Melissa's face drained of color. You kept that? She snapped. Of course, I replied evenly. Some truths deserve to be remembered. The room grew heavy with silence. The children's eyes brimmed with betrayal, staring at the parents who had lied to them for years. I leaned forward. I was thrown away once. I will never allow myself to be thrown away again. This home, this life, is not a safety net for those who only remember me when they need something. My words were steady, my resolve unshaken. For the first time in years, I felt completely in control of the story. Sophie was the first to speak, her voice trembling but clear. Grandma, I don't remember much from when I was little, but I do remember your cookies and the way you read to us before bed. I don't understand why we lost all of that. Tears welled in her eyes. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, his face red with confusion and anger. Why didn't you tell us the truth? He demanded, turning to his parents. David lowered his gaze, unable to answer. Melissa crossed her arms, her lips pressed tight, as if admitting nothing would somehow erase the evidence. I took a deep breath and softened my tone for the children. You didn't lose me. I was always here, waiting for the day you might find me again. What happened was never your fault. Their eyes met mine, filled with both relief and sorrow. For the first time in years, I felt the bond of family stir again, though it came not from my son or his wife, but from the grandchildren who had been robbed of knowing me. As the conversation wound down, Melissa stood abruptly, muttering that this was a waste of time. David followed, defeated and silent. They left without a promise to return, their footsteps echoing through the grand foyer. The door closed behind them, and the house fell quiet again. But it wasn't an empty quiet. It was a peaceful one. Sophie and Ethan remained, asking questions about their father's childhood, laughing softly when I showed them old photographs. Hours slipped by until it was time for them to leave, but before walking out, Sophie hugged me tightly. We'll come back, she whispered. We want you in our lives. Ethan nodded firmly beside her. When their car disappeared down the driveway, I stood at the window for a long moment. I felt no bitterness, only clarity. Being cast aside had forced me to build a life of strength, independence, and dignity. And now, I finally understood, sometimes the family you fight hardest to hold on to is the very one you must let go of in order to bloom. In the quiet that followed, I carried my coffee out to the wide back porch. The sun was rising over the hills of Willow Heights, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and pink. I thought about the years I had lost, the motel nights, the tears pressed into thin pillows, the feeling of being unwanted. Yet I also thought about what had grown from that pain, a thriving business, a beautiful home, and the strength to stand tall without apology. Life has a way of testing us in the harshest ways, stripping us down until we believe we have nothing left. But sometimes, what looks like the end is only the beginning of a second bloom. I was thrown away, yet I flourished. And that is a truth I carry with pride. To anyone listening, I want you to remember your worth is not defined by who leaves you behind. It is defined by how you choose to rise. If my story speaks to you, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts, tell me where you are listening from, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Together we can keep these stories alive.